In 1861, the United States was not yet the solid, permanent nation many people imagine today. It was an experiment under extreme pressure, divided by region, economy, politics, and above all, slavery. State after state was leaving the Union. Angry speeches were turning into military preparations. Families were splitting along sectional lines. Many Americans feared that the Republic itself was about to collapse. At the center of that gathering storm stood Abraham Lincoln. He was not a conquering general. He was not an aristocrat. He was not a king in waiting. He was a self-taught lawyer from Illinois, plain in appearance, sharp in mind, and burdened with one of the heaviest responsibilities any leader has ever carried. Because Lincoln did not inherit a peaceful nation. He inherited a nation already cracking apart. And the terrifying question before him was this: could the United States survive its own contradictions? Could a nation founded on liberty endure while slavery remained rooted at its core? Could democracy survive civil war? Or would America prove that self-government falls apart the moment its divisions become too deep? This is the story of Abraham Lincoln, the president who faced the greatest internal crisis in American history and fought to save the Union. Abraham Lincoln did not seem destined for greatness. He was born in a log cabin in Kentucky in 1809, grew up poor, and had little formal schooling. He read obsessively, borrowed books whenever he could, and educated himself through sheer effort. Over time, he became a lawyer, a skilled debater, and one of the most disciplined political minds in the country. He was ambitious but not polished, intelligent but awkward, funny, yet often marked by deep sadness. Many who saw him did not see elegance or grandeur. What they often missed was the iron beneath the surface. A steady will, a powerful moral intelligence, and a remarkable ability to explain enormous questions in simple human language. Lincoln rose to national attention through the issue that was tearing the country apart: slavery. He was not initially the most radical anti-slavery figure in America, but he believed slavery was morally wrong and fiercely opposed its expansion into the Western territories. That made him a direct threat in Southern eyes to the future of their social and economic order. When Lincoln ran for president in 1860, the country was already in political breakdown. Old compromises were failing. Sectional trust had nearly vanished. The Democratic Party split. Lincoln won the presidency without carrying most of the South. To many Southern leaders, that result was intolerable. They believed the election of Lincoln meant their power, their system, and eventually slavery itself were in danger. So, before Lincoln could even begin governing, the nation began to break. Lincoln was elected in November 1860. Before he was even inaugurated in March 1861, 7 Southern states had already seceded from the Union and formed the Confederate States of America. Before the new president could truly take office, the country he had been chosen to lead was already disintegrating. He now faced an impossible opening test. If he accepted secession, then the United States would no longer be a real nation in any lasting sense. It would become a loose arrangement that could dissolve any time a major election angered one side. But if he resisted secession by force, war would likely come at once. Lincoln held to a clear principle. Secession was illegal and the Union was perpetual. A constitutional republic could not survive if states simply left whenever they lost politically. At the same time, Lincoln tried not to appear reckless or aggressive. He knew the first blow mattered. That blow came at Fort Sumter in South Carolina. In April 1861, Confederate forces fired on the federal fort, and the Civil War began. With that attack, the argument gave way to armed conflict. The Union was now at war. Lincoln's task immediately became almost unimaginable. He had to raise armies, hold the loyalty of border states, maintain Northern morale, manage generals, navigate fierce criticism, and somehow preserve constitutional government while fighting the bloodiest war in the nation's history. He had entered office as a politician. He now had to become a wartime leader. At first, many Americans believed the war would be brief. They were terribly wrong. The Civil War became a long and brutal slaughter. Battles such as Bull Run, Shiloh, Antietam, Fredericksburg, Chancellorsville, and Gettysburg produced casualties on a scale the United States had never seen before. The war consumed towns, families, and an entire generation of young men. Lincoln carried the human weight of this conflict every day. He read casualty reports. He visited hospitals. He spoke with grieving families. He sent men into battle while knowing many of them would never return. Few leaders have had to bear such pain so directly. The strain changed him. War deepened the sadness already within him. It aged his face and sharpened the moral seriousness with which he approached the presidency. Yet it also clarified his purpose. He increasingly saw that the Union could not simply be preserved by rhetoric or sentiment. It would have to be preserved by endurance. At the same time, he was criticized constantly. Some thought him too weak. Others called him a tyrant. Some attacked him for moving too slowly against slavery. Others thought he had already gone too far. Generals disappointed him. Political allies frustrated him. Public morale rose and fell with each major battle. Still, Lincoln kept returning to one central conviction. The Union must survive. If the American Republic broke apart because of a political dispute and a lawful election, then self-government itself might be discredited in the eyes of the world. Lincoln believed the war was about more than maps and armies. It was about whether democracy could endure a mortal internal test. At the beginning of the war, Lincoln's stated goal was preserving the Union. He moved cautiously on slavery, in part because the political situation was delicate. Border states, such as Kentucky and Missouri, remained in the Union, and he feared that acting too abruptly might push them into the Confederacy. But as the war went on, Lincoln came to see more clearly that slavery and disunion were inseparable. Slavery was not a side issue. It was the central cause of the conflict. It was also a foundation of Confederate power, tied to labor, wealth, and the Southern social order. The war could not be fully won without striking at the institution that had driven secession in the first place. So Lincoln made one of the most consequential decisions in American history. On January 1, 1863, he issued the Emancipation Proclamation. It did not instantly free every enslaved person in the United States, but it fundamentally changed the meaning of the war. The Union was now explicitly fighting not only to restore the nation, but to destroy slavery where the rebellion held power. That shift mattered immensely. It gave the Northern cause a greater moral purpose. It made foreign support for the Confederacy far more difficult, especially in Europe. And it opened the door for black soldiers to join the Union war effort in large numbers, adding courage, manpower, and moral force to the struggle. Lincoln had changed during the war, and so had the nation's purpose. Saving the Union now meant remaking it. The conflict was no longer only about preserving the United States as it had been. It was about creating a different United States from the ashes of the old one. Even after emancipation, victory was far from certain. By 1864, Lincoln faced one of the darkest periods of his presidency. The war had dragged on for years. Casualties were horrifying. Northern exhaustion was real. Critics called for negotiation. Some believed peace, even at the price of disunion, was better than endless death. Lincoln feared he might lose re-election, and if he lost, the war might end in compromise. The Confederacy might survive. Slavery might endure in some form. Everything for which the Union had sacrificed so much could unravel just as success seemed possible. But Lincoln refused to retreat from the cause. He remained committed to reunion. He remained committed to emancipation. He remained committed to the belief that the sacrifices of the war must lead to something lasting and meaningful. Then the military tide began to turn more decisively. Ulysses S. Grant applied relentless pressure against Robert E. Lee in the East. William Tecumseh Sherman captured Atlanta in September 1864. That victory transformed the political atmosphere in the North. Hope returned. Union success suddenly seemed real again. Lincoln won re-election in 1864. That victory was hugely significant. It meant Northern voters had chosen not to abandon the war, not to walk away from emancipation, and not to let the Union die unfinished. At one of the most uncertain moments in American history, the public renewed Lincoln's mandate. By 1865, the Confederacy was collapsing. Union armies were pressing from multiple directions. Southern resources were breaking down. Infrastructure was crumbling. Desertion spread. The end was approaching rapidly. In March 1865, Lincoln delivered his second inaugural address, one of the most extraordinary speeches ever given by an American president. It was not a speech of triumph or vengeance. It was solemn, reflective, and morally profound. Lincoln did not pretend the war had been a simple contest between pure good and pure evil. He understood that slavery had stained the whole nation, and that the terrible bloodshed of the war carried a deeper reckoning. Then came the words that revealed his vision for the peace ahead. With malice toward none, with charity for all. Lincoln did not want a peace built only on revenge. He wanted reunion, healing, and a just reconstruction of the nation. A month later, General Robert E. Lee surrendered to Grant at Appomattox Courthouse. The Confederacy had fallen. The Union had been saved. The Republic had survived the greatest crisis in its history. But victory came at an astonishing cost. The Civil War left hundreds of thousands dead and countless others wounded in body and spirit. It scarred the country more deeply than any prior conflict. The Union survived, but it did not emerge unchanged. It emerged bloodied, transformed, and burdened with the challenge of rebuilding after catastrophe. Just days after Lee's surrender, Abraham Lincoln was shot by John Wilkes Booth at Ford's Theater on April 14, 1865. He died the next morning. The president who had guided the nation through its darkest trial did not live to shape the peace he had won. That loss was immense. Lincoln might have led Reconstruction with greater wisdom, restraint, and moral authority than anyone who followed him. Instead, the post-war era would become bitter, violent, and tragically incomplete. The nation had been saved, but the work of justice and healing was far from finished. Still, Lincoln's place in history was secure. He did not save the Union alone. Soldiers fought and died for that cause. Enslaved people themselves pushed the nation toward freedom with courage and determination. Activists, lawmakers, and generals all shaped the outcome. But Lincoln stood at the center of the storm. He held the Republic together when it was breaking apart. He transformed the war into a struggle not only for national survival, but for human liberty. He proved that democratic government, fragile as it is, could survive even the test of civil war. That is why Abraham Lincoln remains one of the most important figures in American history. He did not merely lead the country through war. He helped redefine what the United States was supposed to be. Abraham Lincoln began his presidency with a nation already collapsing and ended it having preserved the Union at an almost unimaginable price. He faced secession, war, political hatred, military failure, and national grief on a scale few leaders have ever known. Yet through all of it, he remained fixed on the belief that the United States must endure. His greatness was not that he was flawless. It was that he grew under pressure, met events with moral seriousness, and understood that the nation could not be saved without confronting slavery itself. Under Lincoln, the Civil War became more than a war to restore the old Union. It became a struggle to create a freer one. And that is why the story still matters. Lincoln's presidency asks questions that remain alive in every generation. Can a divided republic survive its deepest conflicts? Can democracy endure hatred, violence, and moral contradiction? Can a nation transform itself without destroying itself? Lincoln's answer was not easy, and it was not cheap. It was paid for in blood, sacrifice, and suffering. But his life and presidency left behind a lasting truth: that even in its darkest hour, the American experiment did not have to die.